Good afternoon and welcome to Beyond the Lines podcast. I'm your host, Nikki Watson, on this wonderful Monday. Is it Monday? It feels like one of those funny weeks though because of the holiday, right? So as well as the quickening that we're in, it feels like that wonky week because it's the week of Christmas and the kids, we don't know what day it is, and it's going to only progress from there because we know what happens between Christmas and New Year's, and you don't know, right? The joke is that you don't know what day it is. So today's Monday. That is true. So we don't have the Christmas tree here. I know that I featured it here when we had Tim on, and I decided to go ahead and take it down. It needed a little fine tuning. My grandma had given it to me, and I think I needed to get new lights for it. And so we're just gonna, maybe I'll move over here a little bit. So yes, welcome. We are streaming live to YouTube, and we're also streaming live to Rumble and X. And so here we go, a pre-Christmas special. We have a Substack article from Nate Silver to go over today, so we're going to read that. But go ahead and like and subscribe, and feel free to just stay connected. The show doesn't go on any sort of a schedule, just little free flow in that way, whenever we can. I try to once a week ish. I think it's a little bit easier. Some of the past episodes that you can go ahead and find on Rumble are audio only. So I think that when we were working on things, trying to develop and pick up from the day before some of the audio only versions, we had a couple of those run subsequently throughout the week. So all of our past episodes are on YouTube, but only from like maybe 2 months ago started going here. So everything is over on Rumble if you want to check that out. Started the podcast about 3 years ago. In January, coming up on January here. I have to check the comments because very good. Had some comments I had to delete a couple episodes ago. They were just coming in so quickly. It's not that kind of a show, although I appreciate the engagement, but it's not that kind of a show. So we have to delete and ban people, unfortunately. So keep the comments clean so everybody is welcome. And this will be fun. So anyway, what we have entitled here is what Nate Silver got right about Heather Cox Richardson. So I was so extremely excited and fortunate to join XF on his live stream yesterday. And we went over the article a little bit, and he gave his insights, which are very much appreciated. And so we're going to kind of riff a little bit on that and go ahead and read the article. So if you're not familiar, let's do a little screen sharing. And if you're new to the show, thank you so much for joining. Just a little baby channel here, but we'll see. Talk about different things. As you'll see, we do a little clickety clack here with the screen sharing. That's what somebody called it, the clickety clack show. So that's what we'll call it. We're going to screen share here to the article here. All right, here we go. No, we're not going to do that. Okay, very good. Can you guys see that? Very good. Okay, so we're actually going to, do you guys like, nobody's commenting here. Sometimes people comment and help me out, but I don't know if you guys would prefer this or I like to maybe this, because then you get to see my expressions a little bit more. Okay, get what you pay for here. So let's go to here. Okay. If you are new to the show, I have been following Heather Cox Richardson's work for, I know I hate to say it, guys, it's been about 3 years now. At this point, it's been about 3 years, and she is a historian, clearly. I like to call her Facebook's favorite historian. She has a huge following on Substack, one of the number one, I forget what they're called, like contributors or what you would call them. She used to be number one with the most subscribers. I think she's gone down a few. And so we do a lot of deconstructing of her live streams, and not so much her Substack, but that's included in the commentary. But we're really deconstructing her live streams that she does. So when Nate Silver posted about, and if you're not familiar with Nate Silver, he is, Nate Silver is so I think that he really rose to fame with his election forecasts. He refers to himself as a poker player at heart. Yeah, because I think that I sometimes make election forecasts and write about things. Yeah. So he is, he's made some election forecasts here in the past. I think in 2012 or 2016, 2020 or whatever, his forecasts for who was going to be the president were pretty accurate. And so he's gotten a reputation for sort of those types of things. But anyway, so he started writing something about Heather Cox Richardson. And so we're going to check it out. So he writes, "What is Heather Cox Richardsonism? No longer just a Substack. It's one of the three emerging factions of the Democratic Party." First, it was blue skyism. Now it's Heather Cox Richardsonism. Given the changes to the algorithm, tweets don't really go viral these days unless they fall into one of a few dubious niches. But this one from the weekend sparked a relatively big reaction, both on X and negatively, of course, on Blue Sky. So Nate Silver did post this on his X account. I think it was last week. And it said the Democratic equivalent of the Tea Party is basically Heather Cox Richardsonism, a kind of purity politics rooted in belief in the historical righteousness of the progressive project paired with a loose grasp, if not an outright disdain for the role played by public opinion. He writes, "I think it was a good tweet, but there's more behind it than can easily be expressed in 280 characters. So as part of the occasional Silver Bullet series, Nate Tweets explained, let's work our way through it. Heather Cox Richardson is a historian who earned her PhD at Harvard and who now teaches at Boston College and one of the most influential political writers in America. HCR's Substack, Letters from an American, had seemed like an unlikely hit when it first spun out of a series of Facebook posts late in Trump's first term, but it has since only grown in influence. It currently ranks number 3 on the U.S. politics bestseller list, by far Substack's most popular category. I think Chris Rufo is actually number 1 on Substack right now. Although Richardson rarely paywalls posts, these leaderboards are based on paid subscription revenue, meaning that people frequently sign up for a paid sub anyway out of loyalty to her cause. The only other publications that rank higher in the category, the Free Press and the Bulwark, have dozens of contributors and use Substack as a publishing platform for what are essentially traditional mid-sized newsrooms. HCR is much more of a solo operator. Her newsletters, like Ankar's paintings, are labeled by the date, usually arriving in my inbox around midnight from her home in coastal Maine. While I doubt this was Richardson's intent, this is in some ways an admirable example of American entrepreneurship. I really have a hard time reading the beginning of this because it's not really getting into the meat and the potatoes of my commentary on this, but I guess we're going to keep going. If anybody has any objections, please feel free to share in the comments. While I doubt this was Richardson's intent, this is in some ways an admirable example of American entrepreneurship. She provides allyship to a market niche, older, college-educated, normie liberals, especially women, that is poorly served by a mainstream media perpetually chasing younger, often male audiences. And furthermore, which has taken a rightward turn under Trump 2.0, increasingly reflecting the political preferences of wealthy owners and publishers. It's safe to assume that HCR is earning millions of dollars per year from Letters from an American. But many people have made orders of magnitude more money by being, for instance, early investors in Bitcoin. So all credit to her success. Nevertheless, it's an interesting cultural and political phenomenon. And I'm sure she's making money too from her speaking gigs, and like she interviewed, she's getting paid to do other things too. She's not just getting paid from her Substack, but apparently, yes, she's making about $12 million a year on her Substack. If you look that up, there was a couple articles that were printed in 2023, I think it was, that featured her specifically about Substack and how much she was making. And she was like the number one, like, profiter of Substack, like the highest earner, is how you would say, I guess. 1,000 flowers are going to bloom in the Substack ecosystem. A fair number of you subscribe to both Silver Bullet and other authors whom I frequently disagree with, and that's great. I'm not sure how you'd measure this, but I guess we'd rank highly. I guess you'd rank highly in political diversity among comparably sized Substacks. Great. Okay. There is almost certainly a wider range of voices represented in the media today than quarter century ago, when the milquetoast group thinky centrism of shows like Meet the Press tended to drown out all other perspectives except Fox News and right-wing talk radio. In the older days, Richardson probably wouldn't have been given the same opportunities, or if she had, she would be literally somewhat boxed in by TV bookers. Nate, you're really, really going easy here. You're really sliding in smooth and easy. I guess we're going to keep reading until we can get to the commentary. She would be boxed in by TV bookers into speaking toward particular talking points or playing a certain TV-ready role. But while success on Substack generally brings a lot of freedom, it also risks audience capture. It also means that Richardson, however reluctantly, has become a political celebrity, an avatar for something bigger than herself. Having experienced a little of this myself, I know it can put you in an uncomfortable position. I'm sure she's super uncomfortable. You're minding your business and suddenly you're getting recognized at the grocery store, and hundreds of thousands of people, millions in HCR's case, are hanging on your every word. Pretty sure that's part of the gig for her. Nate, I'm pretty sure that's part of the gig for her. Since they were dropped from the SAT, let's revisit how analogies work. Since they were dropped from the SATs? Is that true? Okay. So while I'm empathetic to HCR, she has a very big platform, and I don't think her success is any accident. It reflects the evolution. Now, we don't either. We also don't think that her success is by accident. We definitely think it's actually a lot more manufactured than we actually think that it's a lot more manufactured than what Nate is presenting here. And we can go into that. It reflects the evolution. So it sounds like he's speaking that it's a little bit more organic, or all organic. It reflects the evolution and how a large segment of the Democratic base has reacted to Trump. Let's get back to that tweet, which called Heather Cox Richardsonism the Democratic equivalent of the Tea Party. I'm not saying that they're exactly alike. Suppose I tweeted that the European equivalent of New York pizza slices is basically doner kebabs. This is not intended to imply that doner kebabs are a type of pizza or that pizza is a sandwich. Rather, they serve as some analogous functions as greasy, tasty, cheap, late-night food typically ordered at a counter and messily consumed somewhere on or near the premises. The contrasts are also interesting. Why are pizza slices in Europe usually kind of shit? So when I write about the Democratic equivalent of the Tea Party, this analogy implies similarities as well as differences. Differences shaped by the contours of the respective demographics of Democrats and Republicans, their relationship with various institutions, and their formative political experiences. I'm hoping to do a part 2 of this that goes through the comparison more explicitly. That would be great. That would be awesome. But this isn't coming out of nowhere. The tweet was basically a spin-off from last week's newsletter about Democrats' increasingly angry mood and how that could lead to some electorally suboptimal choices. Nor is the comparison particularly original. In October, the Edingermentum newsletter, always a great read, even when I disagree, which I often do, published a post entitled "The Democrat Party's Tea Party Moment Has Begun." Okay. This sort of goes into alignment with some of the stuff that we talk about here on the show, specifically about Heather Cox Richardson and the things that she says and how she tries to present the present moment. And I call it MAGA face at times. Sometimes, not all of it, but at times it can be MAGA face because they're pulling from MAGA messaging to then present their what they would love to see their party do, and how they're sort of trying to do the law of attraction to like force and create this thing that doesn't exist within the Democratic Party. It cited some of the same factors that I covered in last week's newsletter, such as the political rise of Jasmine Crockett and Graham Plattner. Right. So the Democratic Party's Tea Party moment has begun. It has not, but they want it to. They wish it was. They're trying to, again, make it so. They're trying to manifest it so, but they don't have what they need to have, which is like a Trump. They don't have a Trump. And they don't have a big tent party, right? They don't have the coalition that MAGA was. So they want to create this sort of energy that there's this Tea Party movement, there's this uprising, and there's this, division within the party, which there is, but they can't resolve it. You see? So it also emphasized something else, a disconcerting reaction to Charlie Kirk's assassination from a respectable above-board liberal faction, including Richardson, who passed along misinformation, this is important, about the political identity of the shooter to her 2.7 million strong email list. This is important that Nate covered this. So this is one of the things that he went ahead and did get right here. So this is very important. But in fact, so she waited 2 days to cover the Charlie Kirk assassination. She basically talked shit on Charlie Kirk, and then also went ahead and alleged. So Elle Reeve went on CNN. I think it was that day. I think it was Friday. So Charlie Kirk was assassinated on a Wednesday. And I think it was on Friday during the day that Elle Reeve went on CNN and was like, it was a groyper. And what's her face that is the lady that is on CNN? She was like it almost was like, I don't know, that seems a little far-fetched. And so Richardson picked that up, covered it on Friday night on her live stream. And then Jimmy Kimmel picked it up, of course, right? So we know. Anyway, she got a lot of pushback on that because she never ended up retracting it. Because the story is, what the official story is, and this is what Richardson prides herself on, is being like, I'm fact-based, I'm only doing facts, and I'm a historian, and it's based on history, and we're doing facts, right? And so saying that it was a groyper when it was already the official statement that it wasn't, and then not retracting it. So Nate goes on, but in fact, the alleged shooter was not someone on the left. So this is what she wrote. He's writing what Richardson wrote. The alleged killer, Tyler Robinson, is a white young man from a Republican gun enthusiast family who appears to have embraced the far right, disliking Kirk for being insufficiently radical. Rather than grappling with reality, right-wing figures are using Kirk's murder to prop up their fictional world. Briefly, they claimed Robinson had been radicalized in college. Then, when it turned out he had spent only a single semester at a liberal arts college before going to trade school, MAGA pivoted to attack those who allegedly had celebrated Kirk's death on social media. After having speculated, this is Nate writing now. After having speculated without evidence that Robinson was a groyper who had killed Kirk for being insufficiently conservative, Richardson was proven wrong by subsequent events, but she made no effort to correct the record, and her misleading interpretation traveled widely. There was possibly even a thread between Richardson's newsletter and Jimmy Kimmel being suspended, for example, after he repeated a similar theory on his show. And I also want to throw in another content creator who has since deleted her TikTok account. She started it, I think it was in January of last year. Ran a bunch of TikTok videos. She's still on YouTube and she's still on Substack, but her name is Cy Canatrell, C-Y. She was also interviewed on The Left Hook, that Waj guy, whatever his name is, back in October, doing a online extremism thing, including the groyper. And she was also talking about groyper. And so I'm curious as to that narrative. I'm curious as to all of that too. Like, there were a select few of people online, Richardson being one of them, who was saying that Charlie Kirk's assassin was a groyper. And then all of a sudden it was like, didn't retract it, pulled it, not talking about it now. So Okay, I agree with Joshua A. Cohen, aka Eddingerminton, that this seems like a revealing moment for Democratic politics, that such an influential person, a history PhD from Harvard who claims to be highly concerned about misinformation, would commit a misinformation misdemeanor of her own. Nate, she does it all the time. I've been studying her work for 3 years now. She does it all the time. That seems significant. I would agree. Democrats have had their problems with epistemic bubbles, but this one hit a little differently. Richardsonism and the three factions of the Democratic Party. I'd argue that there are three main factions of the Democratic Party as the jockeying is already underway for the 2026 and 2028 primaries. First, there's the capital L left. Yes. Populist, deservedly feeling recharged by the success of Zohran Mamdani and a backlash to the increasingly political, assertive billionaire class. Next, I'm like thinking of like the Fight the Oligarchy tour that's funded by oligarchs. Okay. Next, there's what you might think of as the abundance libs. Technocratic. We actually covered this article. It was a New York Times article where they were talking about Project 2029. We actually read that article through, and that's where I'm not sure if, I mean, it's definitely where I feel like I was introduced to the term abundance libs, but I know talking to XF yesterday on his live stream, he seemed a little bit more familiar with it and had like a much better explanation for it. So you should check out that recording of his that he puts all of his stuff on Patreon. I digress. Go back here. Next, there's what you might think of as the abundance libs, technocratic, more willing to find common ground with Republicans and more sympathetic to market-based solutions. I'm a big fan of Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, the authors of Abundance, but I think the project is more neoliberal than left-wing. To me, not such a bad thing. That's a subject for a different newsletter, however. The third faction, Richardsonism, or a term I'll treat as synonymous with it, #resistance libs. Yes, this makes perfect sense. They are the resistance, Nate. They are, for sure. They're older, with extremely high educational attainment, predominantly female, and very highly politically engaged. This is the audience for a cluster of political activism encompassing things such as the No Kings protests and some highly popular anti-Trump substacks. Nate, you're being so generous. So generous. Along with certain prominent podcasts and much of Blue Sky. You could argue for the existence of a fourth faction, the social justice left, aka the woke left, but I'd claim that it's largely been absorbed into the others. Okay. If you're a longtime reader of Silver Bulletin, you'll know that it's the #resistance libs whom I clash with the most. I as well. Partly that's because of taste. I'm not going to lie, I find them kind of cringe. But it's also because I think they have the worst political instincts of the three groups. This is where Nate's nailing it. For instance, in their infatuation with Gavin Newsom and their steadfast defenses of Joe Biden's decision to run for re-election. It's also because I sometimes find them hypocritical. They're always, I would say that they're always hypocritical, generally for the most part, more often than not, but sometimes finding them right. I mean, so we do a lot of that on this show where we break down some of the narratives and we watch and listen and we go to people talking. And, like that Jennifer Welch lady, break down what they're saying. And a lot of what they say is hypocritical. That's sort of the whole theme. What purport to be, and I know in politics, like there is hypocrisy, but it's that unreflected self of the Democrat Party messengers that is so obvious and overt that we really like to look at. What purport to be principled defenses of democracy are often just defenses of the Democratic Party, right? So this is where, when I started listening to Heather Cox Richardson with an open mind and an open heart and open ears and open eyes, I was like, she's a historian, like what am I missing? But she wasn't being critical of the Democratic Party. Now, I don't like the anti-imperialist content creators on YouTube either, where they criticize, they do a liberal criticism of power where they are criticizing everybody. They definitely will criticize the Democratic Party, which is great. They'll criticize Biden, but then they do some dot connecting that is not, I think, honorable. And they do misleading stuff. based on my own opinions of why in the media ecosphere. But so it is nice to see people, like a Jimmy Dore, right? Like Jimmy Dore is going to criticize the Democratic Party, but then he may be like, well, we're not going to vote for Trump or whatever. I mean, I think actually he may have inevitably voted for Trump. Yeah, so I don't like the TDS as the foundational piece, and it seems like it's whatever their thing goes, whatever they say goes, and they change their model based on what narrative they're trying to do, right? So the gatekeeping of that. So I appreciate criticism of the Democratic Party, and with Heather Cox Richardson, it's no criticism of the Democratic Party. It's then going back to like 1885. So instead of going back to like Biden, right? Like, let's go back in history, not too long ago. Let's go back there. Instead of going back in time to the Biden administration, we have to go back into 1885 to talk about how and why the Republicans now are Nazis, as she did overtly call them in the last episode that we deconstructed her recent recording with her friend Joanne. So yes, it's definitely pro-Democratic Party as it stands. So that's very obvious. And I think that Republicans can criticize Republicans. And I think that that's how MAGA was made, was criticizing the Republican Party. You see, so that's why they cannot have their Tea Party moment. They're not going to be able to MAGA the Democratic Party because they don't have what it takes. They just don't. And they also can't criticize themselves. So, yeah, I mean, but whatever you call this faction, the hashtag resistance or no kings or Richardsonism, yeah, you could call them the no kingers. I mean, I'm not trying to like church it up and give them branding and all that stuff, but the resistance or no kings or Richardsonism, I think one must identify it as a distinctive thing. Richardsonism often clashes with the abundance libs, especially on questions of electability and the strategic benefits or lack thereof of moderation, but it also doesn't always vibe with the capital L left. There's not a lot of economic populism, for instance. Take a look at this field survey of No Kings protesters published by Axios. What were their top issues? Issues that attendees of the No Kings DC protests say motivated their participation. Hold on 1 second. I'm sorry. I have to text my kid real quick. I'm supposed to pick him up from basketball. Can you get a ride? Okay. Field survey of 348 attendees on October 18, 2025. Trump, 80% Trump. Immigration, 74%. Yeah, politics, voting, federal workforce reduction, funding freeze, racial justice, systemic racism, 66%. Social welfare, LGBT rights, 62-59. Income and wealth inequality, women's rights, reproductive rights, 56%. Climate change, the environment, 52%. War in Gaza, 46%, which is interesting because this was the week before Trump had it wrapped up, right? October 8th, the No Kings protest, they had it wrapped up. He had the war in Gaza wrapped up. So gun control, 44%. Peace, 43%. Labor, 34%. Religion, 15%. All right. There's King Trump himself on top, of course, but immigration rated considerably more highly among protesters than healthcare or social welfare, in contrast to the general public's greater interest in economic issues. Among the broader electorate, most voters citing immigration as their number one issue are Republican-leaning. According to the AP VoteCast exit poll, they chose Trump over Harris by an 88-10 margin last year. While the No Kings voters are anything but that, there are also some echoes of wokeness on the No Kings priority list. Racial justice, systemic racism rated more highly than income and wealth inequality among the No Kings crowd. Right. So why did people vote for Trump? and LGBTQ plus rights on par with it. Right. Yeah. In fact, some of the best critiques of Richardson have come from writers like Cohen and Nathan J. Robinson, who are well to my left. Here's Robinson in a 2023 review of Richardson's book, Democracy Awakening. Essentially, Richardson seems to believe that there's a war between democracy good and autocracy bad, and that the forces of democracy are represented by the Democratic Party, while the Republican Party are bigots, thugs, and would-be dictators. And while I wouldn't quibble with any part of that description of the Republicans, I think that Richardson is not nearly critical enough of the Democratic Party, which appears in her story almost entirely innocent and wholly devoted to the well-being of the American people. My own belief is different. I think until we recognize that failures by the Democratic Party helped to bring us Donald Trump, we cannot shore up the country against the authoritarian threat that Richardson and I are both alarmed by. Yeah, they don't want to hold their party accountable. I don't agree with Nathan Robinson on much, but I'd endorse almost every word of this. There's no shortage of reasons to feel legitimate outrage about Trump, from January 6th to tariffs to disrespect for the rule of law. Yeah, I don't know how Nate feels about January 6th. To tariffs, I can assume what he feels like, I suppose. To disrespect for the rule of law, to cronyism, to gutting the CDC, to even simple meanness, like his Truth Social post yesterday that attributed the tragic murder of Rob Ryder and his wife to Trump derangement syndrome. We're going to disagree on a lot of this stuff. Where I find common ground with Robinson is in being skeptical that Richardsonism is helping the pro-democracy cause as much as it claims to. Robinson and I both have a low opinion of the political efficacy of the Democratic Party establishment, even if we'd undoubtedly recommend different sets of course corrections to it. But the Richardson wing of the party is as pro-establishment as it gets. Richardson twice interviewed Biden, and there was no pretense of journalistic distance. Mr. President, it's such a joy to be here with you in this historic room on this historic day with a historic president, began her 2022 interview. Nor were there any questions about the war in Ukraine, even though Russia had invaded just a day earlier. Yeah, so this is where he gets it right, where he calls her out for representing the Democratic Party and promoting them and not holding them accountable at all. Purity politics and Richardsonism's aversion to self-reflection. Indeed, while both the capital L left and the abundance libs do their fair share of self-critique, it's conspicuously lacking from the Richardsonists. In fact, the resistance libs often reject any attempt to even characterize their approach to politics. I'm fascinated by how Nate Silver turns everything he doesn't like into a bespoke ideology. It's not that he is annoyed by HCR. It is that she is a dreaded ism responsible for everything he doesn't like about the Democratic Party. Same with Blue Sky. No, I mean, I think this is a critique of Richardson. So, yes, as the New York Times' Jamal Bowie points out, I'm fond of my little categories and isms. Blue Sky ism shares some attributes with Richardsonism, such as a reverence for academics, although they're not exactly identical. Blue Sky has a mean streak that is very much not shared by the kinder, gentler Richardson, for instance. I actually think she's quite aggressive, and she's passive aggressive, but I actually think she's quite aggressive. So based on the things that she has also shared on, that she's reshared on Blue Sky, but also just, again, familiar with her work, I think that she is not kind and not gentle, but definitely presents herself that way most of the time. But the words that she's saying are not kind and gentle, right? While you're welcome to disagree, I think these anthropological explorations of the Democratic Party are one of the better beats we have going at Silver Bulletin. Furthermore, I think I can offer an interesting vantage point, being fairly liberal myself, but having backed into politics in a weird way, such that I've always felt like an outsider to the field. I always think these distinctions help explain both some of the seeming contradictions you're seeing in the Democratic Party today and where it might turn next. The left has some 2028 frontrunners like AOC. She's not. The abundance libs have Pete Buttigieg. They don't. And Josh Shapiro. Good luck there, among others. For the resistance libs, despite sometimes styling them as contrarian, the top candidate is Newsom. Is he? Or perhaps even Harris again. I mean, Nate is doing the talking, right? He is like this is the plan, right? This is what they say they're doing. But AOC is Pete Buttigieg, Josh Shapiro. Like, good luck with these people. I mean, really, like, roll them out. Go ahead. You know, like, they don't have anybody else. This is all that they have. But from an optics PR perspective, these people don't do well. Or even Harris again. So who is reportedly leaning toward another presidential run. The podcaster Jennifer Welch, who I just mentioned, and we've done some deconstruction on her in some past episodes, was just hailed in a New York Times headline as the Democrats' toughest critic, which she is in a way, but she's awful. Have you listened to her? She's racist and also homophobic. Actually, if you listen to her, that's my opinion. This is an entertainment show, but we've made that argument in past episodes. So this is part of why we look at, like, why are they rolling these people out? Why are they like this sort of a thing? Like, if Jennifer Welch is your Democrats' toughest critic, what does that say? And I'm not speaking specifically necessarily to Nate. I'm just doing the commentary on it as is. But she recently hosted a book party for Harris, and she also loves Obama too. So, which wouldn't seem to represent a particularly critical position. Right. I would agree, Nate. The aversion to course correction reflects what I think of as purity politics. We are the good voters, the righteous ones, not like those racist, fascist, neo-Confederate, and Christian, ethno-nationalist MAGA types. How would you even dare to criticize us? Right. I would agree. The sense of being on the right side of history is compounded by two other factors that make Richardsonism resistant to criticism. One is the success of the business model. It's hard to change lanes when you're constantly getting positive reinforcement in the form of likes and subscribers. The other factor is the claim to academic expertise, which is highly persuasive to Democrats who are rightly concerned about Trump's war on elite higher education and the anti-scientific turn among people like RFK Jr. Still, this risks making voters easy marks for anyone with a PhD in their bio. Oh, right. we shared this with me and Linda Lila were talking about this, and Democrats and she brought this up because the way I had read it was that Democrats who are rightly concerned about Trump's war on elite higher education and the anti-scientific turn among people like RFK Jr. So I would check Nate here and say, what is Trump's war? What do you think Trump's war on elite higher education is? And what is it that's anti-scientific? Like, what about RFK Jr. do you think it is? Do you think it's anti-scientific? Okay. I can guess. I'm just asking. Richardson cites sources at the end of each edition of Letters of an American. Okay, this is where Nate gets it right. So she cites her sources at the end of Letters from an American, and she also does this on her Facebook posts rather than providing links throughout her post. This makes them seem more scholarly, but it obscures the fact that her sources are often just random partisans on Blue Sky or Twitter. I'm confident that Richardson's citations for claims about American history are often rigorous. Well, she is a historian. She often cherry picks from the most unreliable sources. True. She's also frequently more partisan than principled. That's a very nice way to put it. Joe Biden got a complete pass in Richardson's world for pardoning his son Hunter, and while she spread misinformation about Kirk's killer, she wrote highly sympathetically about Luigi Mangione after he assassinated a healthcare CEO. Right. Very hypocritical. It's hard to find even the most perfunctory attempts at appeals to higher principles in Richardson's writing when they involve questionable choices made by Democrats. Absolutely. Furthermore, it's common to read things from Richardson that edge up against the definition of propaganda. Very, very generous, because I would consider most of what she writes, except for sort of some of the historical tirades that she goes on, it's all propaganda. Here, for example, was Richardson's take the night after Biden's disastrous debate with Trump last June. All right. Tonight was the first debate between President Joe Biden and presumptive Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump. And by far the most striking thing about the debate was the overwhelming focus among pundits immediately afterward about Biden's appearance and soft, hoarse voice as he rattled off statistics and events. Virtually unmentioned was the fact that Trump lied and rambled incoherently, ignored questions to say whatever he wanted, refused to acknowledge the events of January 6, 2021, and refused to commit to accepting the results of the 2024 presidential election, finally saying he would accept it only if it met his standards of fairness. Immediately after the debate, there were calls for Biden to drop out of the race. But aside from the fact that the only time a presidential candidate has ever done that in 1968, it threw the race into utter confusion and the presidency's party lost. Biden needed to demonstrate that his mental capacity is strong in order to push back on the Republicans' insistence that he is incapable of being president. That he did thoroughly. Biden began with a weak start, but hit his stride as the evening wore on. Indeed, he covered his bases too thoroughly, listing the many accomplishments of his administration in such a hurry that he was sometimes hard to understand. So people were calling out Biden's mental capacity for a long time. I mean, even when he ran. But the debate was so public, and that was when the shift really happened to where then the media was all throwing him under the bus and saying, like, oh, we didn't know. And okay. So turned out maybe she was onto something here whenever she was saying that pulling a candidate out at this point is going to cause the party to lose. But at this point, it was already too late because they had covered this up. They had covered up Biden being sharp as a tack for so long. And so Nate Silver is just pointing out, reiterating what Richardson, how she was basically holding water for him right after the debate. A lot of this, and he writes, a lot of this feels like gaslighting the reader, denying what they saw with their own eyes and ears. So she does this all the time. She gaslights her readers all the time to deny what we see, right? And hear with our own eyes and ears. Biden's only problem was that he covered his bases too thoroughly. Pundits criticized Biden's appearance and soft, hoarse voice. Richardson is suggesting that Biden was struggling only on style points, when in fact he was frequently literally incoherent in uttering phrases such as, "We finally beat Medicare." Later in the post, Richardson claimed that different polls gave the win to each of Trump and Biden, which is another little nugget of misinformation. Every scientific poll showed Biden as the clear loser. Democracy requires walking and chewing gum at the same time. It's trite to invoke, more common than outright misinformation from HCR, though, are explanations of electoral phenomenon that don't align with the bulk of the evidence or the consensus of experts who study elections for a living. Here, for instance, is Richardson's dispatch from November 6, 2024, the day after Harris's loss last year. These results were a surprise to everyone, right? Trump is a 78-year-old convicted felon who has been found liable for sexual assault and is currently under indictment in a number of jurisdictions. He refused to leave office peacefully when voters elected President Joe Biden in 2020, instead launching an unprecedented attack on the U.S. Capitol to stop the counting of electoral votes, and said during his campaign that he would be a dictator on his first day in office. They were actually just protesting to do it was the 10-day count that the Congress, the legislators had the right to do because there were so many anomalies that they then could vote on taking 10 days to review all of the anomalies. It's trite to invoke the apocryphal Pauline Kael line about not knowing anybody who voted for Richard Nixon and therefore being surprised by his win. But even if Richardson herself was shocked by Trump's victory, what sort of epistemic bubble is she living in if she claims the results were a surprise to everyone? I would agree. Yeah. The results were a surprise to everyone. Right. That seems extremely misleading. That's not true. And does Richardson herself even believe that? Right. Even if they were a surprise to her, does she actually believe that they were a surprise to everyone? And it's misleading her audience that they then think that not only does Richardson think it's a surprise, she's saying it's a surprise to everyone. So it's presenting that this is the consensus view when in fact it's not. Trump had won before in 2016. And this time around, while the polls weren't fantastically accurate, they showed as close to a toss-up as you can get. The final silver bulletin forecast was literally almost 50-50. Should Richardson stay in her lane and only focus on history, not contemporary electoral politics? No, I'm not asking for that at all. But if you're going to send out missives about electoral politics to 2+ million subscribers, you probably ought to do the reading about the many reasons that a Trump win was, at a minimum, highly plausible. Richardson, in her post-election newsletter, made almost no mention of immigration, for example, even though border crossings spiked after Biden adopted lax policies despite frequent warnings from more moderate Democrats about the electoral downslide. Yes, I would agree. What did she blame Harris's loss on instead? She does attribute some of it to inflation along with racism and sexism, but the linchpin was disinformation. Richardson even dropped a reference to Russian political theorists and later cites the example of right-wing influencer Benny Johnson, previously funded by Russia, and that actually was debunked. And she still goes on about that. She'll mention like Benny Johnson, who's funded by Russia, that whole, the tenant media. It was never conclusive that Benny Johnson was paid by Russia, right? So, but she's still going with that, which is incorrect. So there are echoes of 2016 here, although she isn't going full Russiagate. She writes, pundits today have spent time dissecting the election results, many trying to find the one tweak that would have changed the outcome and suggesting sweeping solutions to the Democrats' obvious inability to attract voters. There is no doubt that a key factor in voters' swing to Trump is that they associated the inflation of the post-pandemic months with Biden and turned the incumbents out, a phenomenon seen all over the world. There's also no doubt that both racism and sexism played an important role in Harris's defeat. But my own conclusion is that both of those things were amplified by the flood of disinformation that has plagued the U.S. for years now, right? Not including her disinformation. Russian political theorists called the construction of this is so rich. Russian political theorists called the construction of a virtual political reality through modern media political technology. They developed several techniques in this approach to politics, but the key was creating a false narrative in order to control public debate. Not at all what Richardson does. Okay. Okay. Just to be clear, these techniques perverted democracy, turning it from the concept of voters choosing their leaders into the concept of voters rubber stamping the leaders they had been manipulated into backing. Does this sound like what the Democrats have been doing for decades? I don't know. You tell me. Indeed, this is another version of the big cope, attributing Democrats' losses to unfair media coverage. We've covered the big cope extensively before, including in last week's post, so I won't dwell on it here. Richardson at least attributes more of it to Fox News and less to, say, the New York Times, which is the better version of the case. Still, she deprives voters of having any agency. If you voted for Trump, you must have been duped. But how does Richardson account for her own surprise about the outcome? Really good question, Nate. I think that's a really good question. Yeah. Right. So it's like, does she believe in what she's saying, right? If she thinks everybody must have been duped, does that account for her own surprise, right? As Richardson clearly reads widely, so she must be aware that many people pointed out the error in her assumptions about Kirk's assassin. How does she explain her own role in spreading misinformation? Exactly. Good question. Does she still think that Tyler Robinson actually was a groyper? Good question. We would love to know. Do you actually think that? Did she think that at the time? Does she still think that today? And why no retraction? If it was inadvertent, she read something from a trusted source that turned out to be wrong. She ought to have corrected the record. Agreed. Or is there a sort of utilitarian calculation here? Because Richardson views Trump as an existential threat to democracy, does that mean she sees her role as more that of a political operative? Good observation. Operatives are never held to high standards of accuracy in the first place. And less an academic operating at arm's length. She's well within her rights to do that, I suppose. Lots of prominent liberals, including Klein, for example, navigate a boundary between being a commentator and a player in the system. Nonetheless, Richardson's scholarly, detached tone masks what it's sometimes partisan cheerleading. And I've covered this on my Telegram channel where I post a lot of content about this, is that she promotes herself as a historian. She does not differentiate between political commentary, her opinions. she is presenting herself again as the expert in history and as this authority. And she says things as though they are fact. She says Stephen Miller is a white nationalist and he wants to get rid of white people of color. That is not based on anything, on any facts. It's all based on fictional, speculative, could be true, maybe, but nothing proven, all speculative. She bases her outlandish claims on, right? Those are all, she says, when did Republicans become Nazis? She said that the national security strategy document was an overtly white supremacy document. So this is a concern that I have about her, the information that she's giving to her big audience who are true believers in this, and that she, again, presents herself. Does she actually believe in what she's saying? And what sort of accountability is she and standard is she being held to as a representative of institutions, and, you know, again, an expert in history, and not, you know, if she is a political operative, which I would say she is, then she needs to differentiate between that and communicate that with integrity and honor and ethical standards to her audience. Moreover, Nate writes, moreover, democracy requires living in an electorate where many voters are misinformed or otherwise exhibit deplorable characteristics. So here's my challenge to Richardson and the other resistance libs. Name one prominent electoral issue on which your personal view of what's right might nevertheless harm Democrats in their effort to win elections. One of mine is immigration. I'm an unabashed lib on this, to the left of probably 85% of the country. I favor enforcement at the border, but I'd like to see much higher levels of legal immigration, maybe not 1 billion Americans, but perhaps double or triple the current quotas. This isn't as unpopular as you might think. Nevertheless, if I were advising a Democratic candidate, I wouldn't advocate for them to propose the Nate, let's triple immigration plan. By a 44 to 35 margin, voters still trust Republicans more than Democrats on immigration. Trump's approval rating on immigration is a net -5, not great, but considerably better than his overall numbers or his -17 on the economy. What I'm suggesting here is that something that ought to be pretty basic. In a democracy, you need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, keeping in mind that your political preferences might not match those of the median voter. Prioritization is also a consideration in an attention economy where voters have limited bandwidth. That doesn't mean that you always want to roll over your political capital into the next election. Sometimes you want to cash your chips in for a win. Democrats paid a high political price for Obamacare, for instance, but now millions more Americans have health insurance. So when people like Bowie write that what substantially seems to annoy Silver is the existence of people with principles, they're getting it wrong. No. What annoys me is people like Richardson or Bowie who don't understand the is-ought distinction between the world they think ought to exist. This is really good. I think Nate really nails this one. So he's talking about the is-ought distinction between the world they think ought to exist, where Biden won a commanding re-election victory and Trump is in jail, and the messy political world that we're really living in, but who at the same time are not particularly principled when it comes to recognizing bad behavior on their own side. Absolutely. And who have other poor epistemic habits, including sometimes spreading misinformation themselves. Right. I'd have more admiration for Richardsonism if it were either ruthlessly effective at politics or meticulously clear-eyed and consistent about its principles. I actually think that's quite well said. It often winds up somewhere in between, squaring the circle with garden variety Democratic Party partisanship. Right. Like maybe some anti-imperialism, maybe some criticism of the Democratic Party mixed in there. But it's very pro-Democratic Party no matter what. But that's normal. It's usually what happens to political movements in a two-party system, and Richardsonism is coalescing into something more than a merely very popular substack. Whatever you call it, it ought to be treated, like abundance or the tech right, as one of the winning political movements of the past several years. That means it deserves to be analyzed, criticized, mocked, and celebrated as any significant political movement is. So I disagree that it's a political movement. I don't think that Richardsonism is anything other than, and XF brought up some really good points, is that Richardsonism could be her groupies, her audience, but she and of herself is not a political movement. and treated as harnessing the political grab. But I do believe that she should be mocked and criticized and analyzed and celebrated when she gets it right, which I'm trying to be so generous as well. Maybe we'll do a show on that. Maybe we'll do a show on what Richardson gets right. And treated as harnessing a political gravity of its own rather than just rolling with the evening tides on the Maine seashore. Thank you. Thank you, Nate. Very good. All right. So I think that was good. Yeah. Like I really like how he talked about her end notes and how she doesn't include her notes in what she's writing, right? She puts them at the end and it looks more scholarly that way. But he brought up a really good point, which is that they're oftentimes like blue sky posts as the source, right? You know, Politico, WAPO, fine. But like, you know, Adam Kissinger's, you know, X post his blue sky post isn't really, you know, JoJo from Jersey's blue sky post is not a great source, you know? So, that's a good point there. And also that it should be definitely mocked and criticized and reflected upon, you know? I mean, if this is an actual attention getting media source, like we just mentioned, you know, with the Kirk assassination, with her having such a huge audience, putting out that misinformation, and then Jimmy Kimmel picking it up. And then we saw everything that happened with that. And then her not retracting it and, you know, just defending the Democratic Party at all costs. And I like how he articulated it between like, you know, just going on principle. And it's almost like, is the project that is Heather Cox Richardson not supposed to be anything other than it is? Right? Because she doesn't talk about other issues. She doesn't talk about anti-imperialism. She doesn't talk about war. She doesn't talk about Gaza. She doesn't talk about really the actual issues, right? It's sort of just like the ballroom, right? Like the episode that we reviewed with her and Joanne, where they were like, he tore down the White House, right? It's very dramatic, right? And so is she just doing it for attention seeking and audience capture, or does she actually believe it? And if she doesn't actually believe in what she's saying, then what does she believe and why? And then doesn't that bring up questions about her authenticity, right? And her credibility and her integrity? And I would love her to just do history, like just do that. Why do you have to include the political commentary? Because she is a Democratic Party operative. But I would be curious to hear what Nate Silver would have to say too, like about her efficacy and like who is her target market. And it sounds like a part 2 is coming up, and that would be really cool to get a part 2. But like what is her efficacy? What is her end game as well too? Like, so she'll say like, you know, we reviewed some of her stuff before we deconstruct, you know, the where she was saying like Chuck Schumer, you know, we need to get Chuck Schumer out of there. She was almost trying to do like a Jennifer Welch thing, right? So and Nate Silver mentioned Jennifer Welch. She was almost trying to do that, but then like the next day she'll have Gavin Newsom on. Like you can't, you know, so she has these, you know, she has Mark Elias on, interviewing him. She has did she have Pete Buttigieg? I don't know if she did. She'll have these, you know, politicians on and does the media circuit and such, and she goes on, you know, the Bulwark, and she'll go on. I think she was on with the Left Hook, you know, Raj, what's his name? So yeah, so I would be curious to like, what is she up to, you know, and what is going on with her Substack and the way that she's, you know, getting her income. But I mean, what is the, you know, it's not really so much Richardsonism as it is really the resistance lives, I think, as Nate described it. So Richardsonism is not really like a political movement in and of itself. It's more of just like the copy and paste of the resistance live, right? the no kings. And, do you really believe that Trump is a dictator? Like, do you really believe that we have rising authoritarianism? So Richardson was doing this thing where she was like, she'll say fascism, but then she'll be like, it's really just, rising authoritarianism. And because you have to, there's fascism fatigue, right? You can't, how long can they just run these words, before people start to tune out or not take them seriously? Up until the 2024 election, it was like, Trump is Hitler, Trump is Hitler. And now they're still running with it. He's doing a peace plan in Gaza, a week before the No Kings protest in October, and they're still out there saying, Trump is a king. Like, there's just this disconnect between the marketing and the messaging and the narrative and the reality. And I would love to hear Nate maybe touch on some of that stuff about, are the abundance libs at least even more connected to reality, and what is possible? And then what leader would you get? And if you are comparing it to like the Tea Party movement, like, who is your leader then, right? Because Newsom is very unpopular. He's popular among, a certain cohort of Democrats, but not nearly enough to win a federal election. Josh Shapiro is not good. He does not have good optics either. He could be successful. He has promise, but he has a number of skeletons in his closet that are just becoming to be unraveled. So I know you have to win Pennsylvania to win. So as a swing state. So, and Pete Buttigieg, like, I just don't know. Like Pete Buttigieg was on the All In podcast, and Chamath was like basically just hitting him with these questions, and he was like calling him out. He's like, no, like, what, we played a clip on the show before, so it did not go well. It did not look like it went well. And I think if anybody's going to be an abundance lib, it would be Chamath, but he's not at all. So, I would be curious as to who the abundance libs are, and can you make the resistance lib, like as you described it? I'll have to look more into that. Go see what Nate's been writing about that, because I agree with a number of things that Nate was saying. Again, I'd like to see him push a little bit more, and maybe that'll come out in part 2. So, all right, very good. Well, I think that this was good. Yeah, we hit like the 1 hour mark. The sun is setting. The sun is setting here. We've been here for about an hour. I should probably get my kid at basketball, and this was awesome. So I do look forward to Nate Silver's part 2. I would also like to maybe get XF onto here, also known as Joaquin Flores, and but our live stream that we did yesterday, reviewing some of this stuff, you can check out on his Patreon, which I would recommend signing up for, because he is a wealth of knowledge and expertise, and he has just thousands of hours of live streams going over all the geopolitical events going on. And he's so well versed in politics inside the United States, just because of his experience in organized labor, coming from the left, growing up in Los Angeles. And I just love to pick his brain with the dynamics that we're seeing right now, because we're going through, Richardson talks about this moment in time, and we generally are having this moment in time. We are in the Trump era, and it started back in 2016, and we've just seen so many events transpire, right? And I mean, and a lot of the things that we didn't talk about today, alluded to a little bit. Of course, Charlie Kirk, Turning Point USA is a big topic. We talked a little bit about it yesterday, just like what's going on with the organization, with Erica Kirk, with Candace Owens. We went into a little bit about how George Webb was writing on it, just doing this digging and uncovering what's going on. But as it relates to politics inside the United States, listening to what JD Vance is saying, and trying to follow all of the moving parts. I mean, things are moving so quickly. Things, just with world events, Russia and the U.S. relations, China, what is Israel going to do, and how is the American electorate going to respond, and how things are, again, people's preferences are so well known with social media and data collection. We talked a little bit about this yesterday with data collection, is that the Biden administration was doing so much of what is not popular. And they were showing their power projection by power over, versus Trump, who is doing most often, not always, of course, but there's speculation as to why in that case, like, the outcome will be based on him doing things that are not overtly, you would think, popular, him saying something that's not popular, right? Him doing things that are popular versus saying things that are not popular, or maybe that you would think is not. But anyway, so most people, we're more unalike than we are unalike. Our data is very well known about what, again, people's preferences are and where the public discourse is on these things. Do people want war in Ukraine? Do people want war in Venezuela? Do people think there's going to be war in Venezuela? What do people think is going on? Marjorie Taylor Greene just posted something about, I'm not going to pull it up, but she just posted something about, like, nobody thinks this is about, what did she write? I have to go to the channel. I know, I said I was going to go. Tucker coming out on Matt Gaetz, talking to Matt Gaetz. Like, there's so much public disclosure going on. It's so crazy. And like I said yesterday, like, if you've been in this, if you've been doing this for so long, like I've been doing this in my own little layman's way, for what, 5, almost 6 years. I mean, people that have been in this business for 15, like doing the geopolitical analysis, doing the financial analysis. I think of like Tom Luongo or anybody that has been, Alex Craner, like doing this for years, and just seeing again, like where the public discourse is now, where world events are now, and just how crazy that it really is. And it's like, there's so much to be optimistic about. There's so much doom scrolling and blackpilling and so much negativity, especially with these analysts, like on Telegram, on X, on YouTube. Like, it's just so much negativity from people that you would think, like, this is, even just reading the U.S. National Security Strategy document. And it's like, it's not that bad. Like, it's not most ideal necessarily, but it's like definitely a lot better than Biden. Like, it's so much better than a Biden State Department. Like, but then to hear somebody like Brian Barrett be like, this is terrible, and these people will just analyze the shit out of this and be like, this, just saying that it's not good, or that it's really bad, or the US is terrible, and all of this stuff. So it's just strange. Like, and it goes back to, how Nate Silver is asking, like, well, Richardson, almost like, do you believe in what you're saying? Or are you just trying to, like, rally people? Are you just trying to get people to believe in what you're saying, for them to believe what you're saying, but you don't actually believe in what you're saying? Let's see. Maybe my kid got a ride home. Let's see. A lot of posts. Here. Marjorie Taylor Greene writes, here are some interesting facts about Venezuela that are easily searchable. Venezuela is a predominantly Catholic country with very strong laws against abortion, with the exception being the life of the mother. Maduro has been critical of Israel, calling it a genocide in Gaza and against Zionism. Maduro's opposition, Maria Corina Machado, is a strong supporter of Israel and wants to restore strong relations with Israel. She is more left-leaning on abortion and LGBTQ issues. Most Americans I talk to are not buying that this is really about drugs and sanctioned oil tankers. Oil takers? maybe she meant tankers. And it's not about social issues. I just added that to highlight some differences in the two leaders. People voted in 2024 against foreign intervention and foreign regime change, as we have seen far too many times how that's turned out. It's not good. And people are so sick of it. There you go. Yep. All right, let's see. Let's just make sure, because I may have to go. Yep. Okay. So yeah, so if anybody has any comments or anything that you would like to see discussed or any contributions to today's show, I would love to hear about it in the comments. And Nate Silver, I would love to hear your part two. And thank you for your write-up. Definitely worth reviewing and discussing. And maybe we'll do a part two and jump into this a little bit more. Like I said, a lot going on, a lot to deconstruct and digest and see what we got going on. So thank you so much for joining me today. If you're watching this on the replay, please like and subscribe, and I will catch you next time.